Right, so in yesterday's video, I also said that I would record a video where I would present what looks like, it's not really a system of personalities, but how I picture type, not just the INFJ type or the anti-dominant types, but types. I now have got to a stage where, and this is clearly influenced by my deeper engagement with psychoanalysis through my training and readings and so on, I see type now as a particular pattern of interlocking fantasies with PH. Fantasies are images in the unconscious that tell a story of one in relation to others, according to the blueprint of one in relation to one's mother or mother figure. Okay, so they're developed early on in the psyche, and they have affective charge. That's what sort of set the narrative in motion, right? So like the affects, the emotions are central to the fantasies being stories about one's relationship to, as a blueprint, the sort of first significant other, the mother figure. Okay, and these blueprints end up structuring our experience of relating to others in the world for the rest of our lives. All the more unconsciously, as we don't do a lot of self-work, a lot of deep meditative work, a lot of psychoanalytic work. You know, there's lots of ways of getting more acquainted with your unconscious mechanisms. But that's the only way that you can be more aware of the fantasy narratives that basically structure your experience. So in a sense, our fantasies play themselves out in our lives. Okay. Now, of course, we have agency, and the sort of blueprint pattern in the unconscious mind of the fantasies find a translation in the external world, where we behave, where we live, where we love, where we like, where we hang out with friends, we have work, we do things, we create things, we narrate things. These will always be sort of imbued with our unique style. And in that way, there is freedom. So it's not just about the fantasy playing itself out in our lives. We're also doing things and adding our own style to it. Nietzschean grand style, I think, is very close to this notion. And so Nietzsche had a clear notion of this, which doesn't surprise me as an anti-dominant himself. He could see these things, you know, because NI is very acquainted with ways of the unconscious. It has a stronger flashlight than other types when it comes to navigating the dark forest of the unconscious. Stronger flashlight, and perhaps a higher ability to become highly trained at using that flashlight. But if you think of type as a pattern of interlocking fantasies arranged, if you like, hinging on a fundamental fantasy, which is the symbolic fantasy in the middle, the most important one, but there are like lots of more sort of, I don't want to say minor, but like secondary fantasies that kind of are interlocking around it. There's probably a finite number of these fantasies, and what ends up determining your type from that perspective is which one is the fundamental one, which one has the highest agency in coloring, folding, unfolding, structuring, organizing your experience, giving the main narrative of your experience unconsciously. It's true, unconsciously. But you can become more acquainted with it according to the various methods, approaches, practices that I mentioned. Self-work, meditation, shadow work, psychoanalysis, and so on. For the anti-dominance, my contention, my claim is that the fundamental fantasy is a fantasy of repair. Doesn't mean that other types don't have a fantasy of repair. It just wouldn't be the fundamental symbolic fantasy at the core of it. Okay. There are other fantasies of omnipotence, fantasies of killing, fantasies of linking, fantasies of, you know, I came across one just like, I was thinking, of course, like this fantasy exists, fantasies of cleansing. The cleansing fantasies seem to be quite prominent in TI dominance, where these types are the most likely to try to create these complete systems, where basically reality is trimmed down to its barest essentials, so you can do the most explaining with the fewest elements. There's really the sense that you have to get rid of the fat, you have to get rid of the dirt, you have to get the symbolic dirt, of course. You have to get rid of anything that has like the smell of what's accidental as opposed to what's essential. Cleansing fantasy. The cleansing fantasy expressed through thinking and building pictures of thought are kind of like systems, really. They are systems. They are expressions of cleansing fantasies. And the more sort of rigorous and finicky and obsessed with absolutely logical frameworks all over, just leaving nothing to chance. There's a strong control fantasy there. Of course, you have the control fantasy and the cleansing fantasy. Interlocking, which one is fundamental? It's a case-by-case basis. We can't tell unless we know the person, or unless the person knows themselves and are willing to really make that work. You can already see how difficult that is, because you have to reckon with yourself. And a lot of people would prefer denial or not looking, avoidance. But cleansing fantasy, control fantasies, power fantasies, killing fantasies, loving fantasies, repair fantasies, linking fantasies. I mean, there's like a large panoply of such fantasies. We have them all to some degrees, but there's a core one, and there are the secondary ones that are interlocking and hinging as a pattern of interlocking fantasies on that fundamental one. Of course, this is akin to offering an internal phenomenological picture of what types are. But you ask me to offer you my positive contribution or what could be a narrative about types in general, and not just INFJs and INTJs. That's how I look at it these days. And you notice the fact that if you admit from the beginning that fantasies are shared with everyone, and what really matters is the pattern and the ordering, we've already kind of admitted that there's only one big type family, and they're all linked by family resemblance, and you belong to the same type as someone else if you have a lot of traits in common, which would be translated in the language of fantasies as having lots of fantasies with agency and fundamental fantasies in common, and that's what we would call type. Of course, there remains the question, how do we make that cohere with the notion of the cognitive functions? But I've already done that by talking about the repair fantasy of NI. So, what are the main TE fantasies? What are the main FI fantasies? What are the main FE fantasies? What are the main SI fantasies? And notice that if we accept that we all have all fantasies, this is also a way of introducing the idea that we all have in some fashion or other, all functions. And that the fragmentary, sort of not very agent-like shadow functions still have an influence as tertiary or, just accessory fantasies. Not as influential, but still there. Okay, let me know in the comments what you thought, guys, because this is obviously what I think, original thinking in the domain of typology. Don't forget my Patreon. I need your support more than ever, and I cannot do this work without you. For a few bucks a month, you get access to some cool content, like my deep dive videos, 25 to 30-minute videos on topic of your choice. Latest one was on NI, mysticism and magic. If that sounds good to you, there's like dozens now of such deep dives, only accessible to patrons, that I made myself. And I will continue to make them every 2-3 weeks. So that's a good perk. Another good perk that people really like is, of course, the Discord server, where you can interact with me and the other members of the community in real time every day. It's called the Fourfold. So if you like that idea, join us on Patreon. The link is below, and I'd be so thankful to you for it. Also, of course, my 2 books on the INFJ, waiting for the NI book coming next year, hopefully. The Ecstatic Soul is my book on the internal world of the INFJ, the INFJ mind, INFJ consciousness. It's go-to. If you want a deep understanding of the INFJ, you need to read this book. The link is below. And so is this one on the INFJ in the world, the external world of the INFJ, given the mind that he or she has, how to find meaning, purpose, and value in the world as an INFJ. All right, get this book at the first link below, and I'll see you tomorrow, guys. Thank you. Bye-bye.